Hello, and welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzie Ostwalt. Robots, computers, artificial intelligence, and religion. We usually think about words like soul, transcendence, and God when we talk about religion. So where does AI come into the discussion? Dr. Randy Reed is asking these questions and more, and will help us understand the relationship between artificial intelligence and religious faith. Welcome, Randy. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thanks for having me.
I want to get to the discussion specifically of artificial intelligence, but maybe we could start with a more general look at the relationship of technology and religion.
Right.
I think throughout history, we've seen that technological revolutions have had some effect on religion and religious faith and religious practice. Maybe you can mention just a couple of the biggies along the way that have really changed the way religion is practiced.
Yeah, I mean, really from kind of the beginning of Christianity, right? Christianity was one of the earliest groups to adopt this brand new technology known as the codex, right? Where you actually had pages in a book rather than a scroll. And,
right.
and that's one of the reasons why the Christian gospel was able to be circulated a little more frequently than other texts. Of course, the Protestant Reformation would not have been able to happen without the invention of the printing press.
Right.
Right. There was just an explosion of religious publication during the period of the 15th and 16th century, and then in the 1970s, as the television sort of became a mainstay in every household, it was really the televangelists that were kind of on the forefront of that.
Right.
And so I think that what we see is that religion is often something that uses technological advances to advance its own agenda.
And oftentimes there's kind of this balance, right? Because oftentimes particularly conservative religion kind of wants to distance itself from mainstream technology and like social media, but at the same time adopts it for its own use.
That's right.
And we see in social media now is changing religion, the way it's presented, the way it's consumed even. For example, apps. You know? I sometimes use a confession app in one of my classes to illustrate Roman Catholic confession, and there are prayer apps.
Right.
So social media is changing this equation as well.
I think that's right. I mean, I think that as I think religion is in a period of time when, particularly in the West, there's a lot of sort of scrambling because churches are losing members, and so there's a desire to figure out, so how do we reach people now? And so and technology seems to be one of the ways that are doing that. And certainly many scholars have said that the rise of groups like ISIS and terrorist groups like that are fiercely dependent on social media and Twitter and things like that. So what I think we see with social media is that you can get a message out to your constituency much more cheaply, much easily, and have a global reach in a way that we couldn't before.
Right. So do you think there is, thinking about the world religions, is there a tradition that perhaps more than others is poised to benefit from a technologically rich society, or do all stand to benefit equally, or is it the more evangelically oriented religions that might benefit more, or am I just, is that an irrelevant question?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I'm not sure that we know that yet. Whether some of it has to do with demographics. Certainly, there's a lot more use of social media by younger people, and so groups that are trying to recruit younger people are more heavily invested in it. And I think as we see sort of Western religion, particularly in the developed West, being sort of getting older and older, they're less inclined to try to reach out on social media. But I do think that this is a real real problem that social media addresses, which is that there are a set of expectations that the millennial generation and the generation after them will have about how you get together.
Right.
And it's not 9 o'clock on Sundays or 11 o'clock on Sundays we all get together. It is, we all send everybody a text, and then we all meet up at some place. And right, and it's very asynchronous instead of synchronous. It's very spontaneous. And if that's the expectation of how you do community, that certainly changes how religion is going to work. And I think religious groups are struggling to try to figure out how to do that.
So social media in particular at least has the potential to change how we think about religious communities and what we think about community in general.
And how we do them.
And how we do them. Well, looking forward, I guess, since we see that we're kind of in the flux here, what do you see happening in the future beyond social media or including social media? What sorts of developments might we expect to see coming forth as technology progresses?
Yeah, I mean, I think for my own sort of scholarly interest, I'm particularly interested in the way that artificial intelligence is going to impact religion, and partially in the way that religion is going to try to need to use it. I think that churches and religious groups are ultimately going to find ways of implementing artificial intelligence as a way of figuring out who might be interested in their particular message. That artificial intelligence may help them hone their messages. But also I think that artificial intelligence itself may develop into something that has religious significance in and of itself. I mean, we may start to talk about whether an artificial intelligence is a religious entity. And if the predictions are right, that at some point we will develop a super intelligent artificial intelligence, something that is vastly smarter than we are, and that has access to the internet and therefore can be everywhere and can know everything and has kind of unlimited power. I mean, then we'll actually be talking about a quasi-divine being, right? I mean, these are the kind of definitions that we give to gods. And so what already there was there was a news report about a particular guy in Silicon Valley who had filed some papers to create a sort of church of AI in anticipation of the superintelligent AI that would be godlike. Yeah.
So, and just to be clear, when we talk about AI, we're not only talking about kind of creative use of technology and computers, but we're talking about a point at which computers and essentially supersede our own abilities, right?
That's
so
right.
I don't know if the terminology is correct here, but there's futurists talk about a point of singularity where computers could actually not only do what they're told to do, but start taking initiative and
Right.
creating their own patterns of working out problems, maybe creating their own so-called consciousness or self-awareness. And that's kind of, as I was listening to you talk, I mean, that's kind of where we're headed, right? Or at least some people think we're headed that
Yeah,
direction.
I think that's even I think below the threshold of consciousness, and even before the point of a human level intelligence, there may be a debate about the religious status of an AI that, in the same way that there's sort of a religious debate about the religious status of pets, right? I mean, there is this whole debate about, do dogs go to heaven, right? And whether or not they have souls. And of course, dogs don't have human level intelligence, but they have certain ways of connecting with humans that make us feel like they are more than just just our toasters. And so will AIs that seem to have personalities, that will increasingly be able to talk to us, will we start to think about them as potentially being religious entities?
And they may look like us.
And they may look like us.
So we're talking about super intelligent robots here. And it's easy, I think, we're going to do a little experiment here in a moment, but when we start interacting with machines, it's easy then to anthropomorphize those entities because they're talking to us, they're carrying on conversations with us, in the same way that we talk to our pets and we anthropomorphize them and ask these questions. So if God is seen as the redeemer of all creation, then we're going to be asking those questions.
That's right.
Very interesting.
I have a friend who has a very close relationship with her car. She has it names it has a personality for her. I mean, if we do, and lots of people do that with cars. If we can do that with cars, I think a machine that actually talks back to us and is probably going to fall into that category as well.
So we already have machines that talk back to us.
That's right.
And I guess one of the questions I would ask is, and this is really the question of a machine developing a consciousness, can machines believe? Can they hold beliefs? Can we train them to have certain beliefs? And your answer is?
I think probably yes.
Aye.
And the reason, I mean, a lot of this has to do with what sometimes we talk about in religion as your anthropology, right? If you actually hold sort of a naturalistic perspective and think that humans are sort of biological machines themselves, right? That there's nothing special about us. We're just a combination of sort of electrical signals in our brains, and that everything that is in our that produces our mind is in our brain, then there is no reason why, in the long run, I mean, it's just a question of it's just a technical problem of creating something similar to that in silicon instead of in carbon, and then you have a religious person.
When we raise our children, in my tradition at least, in the church, so when children reach a certain age, they're trained in what to believe, and they're trained to recite that belief. So you ask them what they believe, and they recite something. Mm-hmm. You did a little experiment here. I think you want to describe what you've done and what we've got here.
Right. So I have with me today my good and dear friend Alexa, and Alexa, who am I?
I'm not sure who's speaking, but you're in Randy's account.
Okay. Alexa, what do you believe?
I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, and of all things visible and invisible, and in one Lord Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son of God, begotten of the Father before all worlds, God of God, light of light, very God of very God, begotten not made, being of one substance with the Father, by whom all things were made.
Now, of course, that's the Nicene Creed. Alexa's been hanging out with some Roman Catholics lately, so I think that's probably... No, I'm kidding.
She's quite orthodox.
That's
though,
right.
So you ask her the question, what do you believe? And she recites it much in the same way as we...
That's right.
Now, to be fair, you trained Alexa to respond in that way.
That's right.
She's not responding on her own. But we also train our children to respond in a certain way. And eventually that belief, they either make that belief part of their conscious awareness of the world, or they reject it.
Right, and I think that gets us into the kind of interesting question of what constitutes belief, right? What is the thing that we do when we say we believe something? Is it that we can repeat a doctrinal thing? Is it that we can be interrogated on it at some level, ask questions and be able to respond to it? I mean, at what level do we say, that's belief, but what she's doing is not belief. Right. She's just repeating what I told her to repeat.
Right.
And I think these are interesting questions. I mean, certainly the app that I use to do this with Alexa is fairly straightforward. You tell it the question, you tell it the answer, and she can do that. But there are other artificial intelligences that can take a corpus and answer questions about it. And one can imagine that if you gave an AI like that a corpus of religious documents, it could then answer questions in the same ways that we have children do that at the catechism, right?
Well, I think we're already there in many ways. I was reading before this program about a robot that was produced in Japan, and the robot is programmed with that kind of corpus of information about Buddhism. Mm-hmm. And this robot is supposed to function as a Buddhist priest. So it looks like a person, it's dressed as a priest, and then it is trained to do things like conduct a Buddhist funeral at a fraction of the price that it would cost to hire a real Buddhist priest to do that. So we're already there, right? I mean, right. That we've got robots or machines who are doing some of the functions that we would normally reserve for people.
And I think also in some of the Eastern traditions, it's interesting because they have a kind of different conception of the soul. Mm-hmm. Right? There's a robot named Erica that they're developing in Japan, and in Japan the dominant religion is Shinto, and one of the developers says, "This is my religious tradition, and we believe everything has a soul." Right? That trees have souls and rocks have souls, and so of course Erica has a soul. Whereas in sort of the monotheistic traditions, we're much more like humans have souls and everything else doesn't. Right. That isn't the case in other religious traditions.
So I'm sorry. So hearing you talk, it sounds to me like our interaction with technology at this level might actually help us answer some age-old philosophical questions that we've been, like the question of belief. So we're looking at it in a different way, and we might come up with some different answers.
And the question, the question of belief, the question of the soul. You talked a little bit about the singularity, right? I think earlier, and one of the things that somebody like Ray Kurzweil says is that machines will get so smart that we will eventually merge with them, right? And we will become one with the machine. We'll upload our consciousness to these machines, and so then the question becomes: if you were to upload your consciousness to a machine, would your soul go with you, right? And what would it mean for religion if you could have eternal life without believing anything, just by basically paying your fee to get your brain uploaded? There's a episode of Black Mirror called San Junipero where they actually kind of work this out in some ways.
So we're talking about transhumanism here in a sense. The thought of uploading one's consciousness into a machine so that when the body dies, the person can continue. I mean, this is a religious concept. Mm-hmm. This is the search for the fountain of youth, or the quest for immortality. It's what alchemists have been after. It's what religious thinkers have been after. And now certain people are suggesting we could actually reach that reality through this combination of machine and human, carbon and silicon.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating idea.
And you imagine what the potential would be, right? We could actually, what keeps us from being able to explore other star systems and things like that is ultimately that we have finite lifespans, so that 80 and 7 years ago or whatever that we have on this earth. But if you had an infinite amount of time because you were actually uploaded into a machine and you could live forever, imagine the places that you could see, and the worlds that we could explore in the process of that.
So we're kind of rethinking Cartesian dualism here, right? I mean, how do we understand ourselves? Are we bodies? Are we minds? Are we both? Or where does the soul come into play? I mean, this is really muddying the waters. The Western philosophical tradition, it seems to me. Yeah.
And I think that's the key. So if you think there's some sort of special something plus, right? There's your body, but then there's something else that is in your body, but is not actually a part of your body, like the soul. Right. That the notion that you can upload is going to be problematic. What you really need is sort of a mechanistic understanding of the human being that says that, yeah, basically we are wetware that is running on this particular platform, and all we need to do is be able to transfer that onto a different platform, and we can continue to run and without the problems of old age and sickness and that sort of thing. But actually that's what religion has been promising,
right,
since it began, right? It's been promising relief from death.
That's
so
right.
If you actually were to offer that to people without religion, is there still a space for religion? What does religion now offer the world?
Well, that's an interesting idea, and really, that is kind of the universal promise of religion, isn't it?
Yeah.
Well, it seems to me too that this kind of transhumanist reality is transcendence, right? But it also it brings into mind the question about, is there something else? Is there a divine spark? What about the image of God in the Christian tradition? So if you're coming at it from that perspective, then you would draw the line, it seems to me, that machines are created in the image of people, right, but not in the image of God. So that brings that theological question into focus.
Yeah, and is there? I mean, sometimes there's kind of the transitive rule, right?
Yeah.
That if we're created in the image of God and we create something, does that mean that kind of by default,
right,
that it kind of inherits the image of God? And a lot of theologians are sort of rethinking this Imago Dei, the image of God question, it's because they feel like it's been sort of destructive, that it's led to sort of ecological misuse of the planet and that sort of thing, and that if we actually saw the image of God not as something that is intrinsically human, but as kind of something that expands to more non-human creatures like the earth, like trees, like animals, that sort of thing, that we would be better custodians of that. But once you do that, why would you exclude machines?
Right.
Right. And
well, I feel like we've just scratched the surface here, and that we could carry this conversation on for quite some time. Yeah. But one thing is for certain, I think, that the development of artificial intelligence is going to challenge what we think about what makes us human. It's going to challenge us to think about what we think about the divine reality, and ultimately what the relationship there is. And that's going to be fascinating to watch as the future unfolds before us. Thank you so much for being with us. That's really fascinating. I'd love to sit in on your classes and hear you talk about this further. And we didn't even get to the ethical and moral issues involved. So you'll have to come back.
Okay.
Well, that's it for Religion and Life this week. Thanks for joining us, and make sure to tune in next time when we'll be joined by Zena Gorham to talk about Baha'i. Until then, I'm Ozzie Ostwalt.